Her clinical work includes working in integrated pediatrics and OB clinics, providing psychiatric treatment and consultation to both adolescent and adult mothers and their young children. In her research, Dr. Olsavsky utilizes neuroimaging and behavioral methods to examine the impact of maternal risk factors, including adverse early experiences and substance use, on mothers' processing of infant cues and mother-infant relationships. She is the recipient of numerous research and mentorship awards and has extensive knowledge of ACAP's research resources and opportunities. We are thrilled to have Dr. Olsavsky with us today. Dr. Olsavsky, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for such a lovely introduction, Halima. I really appreciate it. So I'm so happy to be here today with you, and I'm so honored to be asked. And hopefully each of you will take at least one thing from my talk, which resonates with you and which will give you strength actually in your research career or help you to decide what you want to do. So I'm going to start out. Let's see here. Sorry, I think I have to click on something on my end. Okay. Can everyone see my slides? Here's the unofficial subtitle, which is "What a Long, Strange Trip It's Been." Because I had a bit of a circuitous path to get here. So these are some disclosures, mostly research funding or spousal employment, none that are conflicts of interest with this presentation, except that I am very engaged within my own life, obviously, and I'm going to talk about my own life. So I don't have complete objectivity. So first I'm going to tell you where I started, and then I'm going to talk about my career journey, and I'm going to finish up with kind of talking about the future and the present. So these are my people. These are my family. You can see here, this is my brother and I next to our car, and, you know, little driving, little merry-go-round there, and like some 70s carpet and couch. So blast from the past for everybody. And this is kind of the entire family. So this is my dad, their dog, my mom, husband, my sister-in-law, my brother, and my niece, and now there is a nephew too. So it's like super exciting auntie territory. And then my uncle and my cousin. And this was my UCLA med school graduation. And it was a pretty kind of momentous event for the family and for me, because I was the first woman to attend college in my family and the first person to complete grad school. And over the whole extended family, I'm also the first doctor. So growing up, like being like a medical doctor who takes care of people was just never something I really felt like was in my wheelhouse. Partially because the main person I knew who did that was my pediatrician, and no one who was related to me or kind of was a close family friend or anything. And you know, I actually, this here is one of my little pensive pictures. My husband, when he saw this picture, told me I look like one of the Shining twins. So I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity to actually give you some travel advice. If you come here, you should definitely go to the Stanley Hotel. Super fun. Your kids can run around in the hedges. They're not as creepy as the movie. And it's right near Rocky Mountain National Park. So since I make my home in Colorado, I like to share tips on travel here. So when I was growing up, I want to be this guy. I don't know if you guys know who this guy is. This is Matt Hooper from Jaws. He's actually a shark biologist. Here he's measuring bite radius. And I was born the year Jaws came out. And I always love the ocean. And I'm part of that Venn diagram, like the people who saw Jaws and the people who still want to go in the ocean. So, you know, I know that's not everyone, but, you know, I was just always really interested in science. I also, and you guys may or may not know this person, this was from a TV show, which was in the late 70s, early 80s, that I used to watch with my mom all the time. And his name is Quincy, and he was a medical examiner, but also a detective. So he's kind of like CSI before CSI. And so I was really interested in kind of like finding things out in science. And, my mom would always watch Discovery Channel with me. And she was very into kind of like just learning on her own. And she's actually probably one of the smartest people I know, and a big reason why I'm here. So when we think about our journeys, right, sometimes our journeys take a side path from what we expect. So when I was growing up, I was pretty much focused on going to college since 6th grade. My mom is kind of like, she's kind of like the Hungarian Italian tiger mom. And she was like, you are going to do it. And so I was super motivated for that. And then when I was in high school, my dad lost his job, and he was unemployed for several years before I went to college. And so then we were kind of like, well, we didn't really save money before that for college because we didn't have a lot of extra money to save in my family. And so then we were kind of like, well, am I going to be able to go to college? Like, what's it? We're trying to figure this out. And so I applied for a ton of scholarships, and I applied to a lot of different colleges. And then I got into Harvard, and my dad said, they have the best financial aid package. And I said, oh yeah, I hear you loud and clear. And I said, I would be happy to go there. And I think one of the things that is interesting about my like how things have gotten better actually since I was in those shoes of being in high school is that colleges have definitely been providing more financial aid, at least, and that is good. And I think they've been providing them for broader demographics. So I think I think that's a good thing. But of course, the price of college has gone up. So, it is really difficult to live in a country where we don't have free, high quality education. And it's on my wish list of things that I want to change in the world, but it's, kind of above my pay grade, I think, a little bit, except for just regular advocacy. So, basically, when I got to college, I kind of got there and I was like, where is everyone? Because I felt like the people that I saw around me, for them, like a lot of them were from a totally different background. And, some of them had been to, almost like had a college level education, or at least that's what it seemed like to me in high school. And I was very cognizant of the fact that I didn't write the same way, and I wasn't sure how to study, for tests that were given because I didn't have the same preparation. And so I was very self-conscious, and I was still thinking about biology, but I also really loved literature. So I was starting to, think about enrolling in some biology courses, and I would always be with the pre-meds because, to be a marine biologist, you got to take a lot of the same kind of prereqs and things like that. So, but I was really intimidated by them because actually they were, some of them were pretty intense, and intense in a way that was like a bit full contact, right? So one example was, I kind of heard a story from a friend where there was this book on reserve at the science library, and it was like that out of print. It was like the last copy in the system, and they put it on reserve, and they said, you have to read this chapter. Not sure why this text book was that valuable, but like it was, I guess, to that professor. So my friend went to go read it. And no, the person who read it before her did not steal the book, and they did not tear out the pages because that would have been too well adjusted. They actually took a Sharpie, and line by line, they crossed out every single sentence in the chapter. And I was kind of like, no, if I want this in my life, So I was kind of not so sure about, kind of science. And so then I actually also really love literature. So my teacher in high school had said, you gotta study the Russians because they have psychology, they have like philosophy in the literature, and it turns out they also have a lot of mental health. There's a lot of mental health problems in Russian literature, actually. And then that is what kind of led me to take neuroscience as an elective, because I was like, what is happening in terms of Raskolnikov? He's counting his steps. Like, I wonder what causes this in the brain. So I started taking neuroscience, and I really loved it. And I was still, struggling my confidence, and they assigned a review for us to kind of like do, and someone had kind of stolen the articles, and I was kind of like, it just, it was like really, it felt like everywhere I turned, it was just kind of, a little aggro. And so I then was like, I'm going to go another path. I really love the Russian language. I'm going to go to Russia and Ukraine. I'm going to do a study abroad. I went there, and I was just like really taken with some of the people I met, and how hospitable they were, and how kind to me they were, and then how they lived. They just didn't have access to many basic things. And so I started wondering, how can I change things? So I actually decided, and here's the part where you're allowed to laugh. I decided to go to Wall Street to get financial education, because I was like, then I can go work for a nonprofit and I can help people, right? Yeah, exactly. Aniki, I see that wow expression, yes. I was extremely naive. So I went there, and I liked certain things about it. I liked the intensity. I liked it better when it was 80 hours rather than 120 hours a week. I liked Excel. I loved Excel. I loved like creating these financial models. I thought it was really fun. I didn't like the sexism, not at all. And I also like had this problem with empathy when I was there, because every time you do a merger of companies, you merge the spreadsheets. And in the spreadsheets, there's always a line that says synergies. And synergies are people that lose their job when you are doing the merger. And I just found it to be so ego dystonic to me that I was just like, I have to get out of Dodge. I can't, like, I just can't, because I was seeing people at companies when we would go there, and I would just think about so it was, I actually started rereading college syllabi on the way to work, trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, and when I got to kind of like Kafka and Proust, I started thinking about neuroscience again. And I was like, well, what about the neuroscience thing? Maybe I can go back to school. Maybe I can become a doctor. I did this Wall Street thing, like I'm still standing, so maybe I can. So I actually sat down with my boss, and I said to him, hey, I'm actually gonna be starting a postdoc program in Columbia in the fall, or in the summer. And I just want to give you like a couple months notice. It's a postdoc pre-med program, so I'm going to go to medical school. And he said, you're going to what? And I said, I'm going to go to medical school, and I'm going to help people. And he said, wait, you're going to leave your salary here. You're going to go to medical school. You're going to pay in order to help people. And I said, yes. And he said, okay, good luck. And so then I actually didn't want to take out a ton of loans, right? Because I'd paid down some loans with that Wall Street work that was extremely ego dystonic. And then I actually, so I was like, I'm going to get a job in a lab. So I got a job as a lab technician in the Candel lab. And I ended up, learning so much there about like synaptic plasticity, learning about kind of how to pick apart articles that are in super prestigious journals that I thought were great journals, but research always has limitations. And that's a really important lesson. And then after that, I was kind of like doing my postdoc part-time at night with my tuition credits. So I did that, and I was there for like, 2.5 years in that lab. And then I was, I took my time with it to make sure. And then I did 2.5 years of work in a neuroimaging lab, because I also was thinking about MD, PhD. And I ultimately decided I can get an MD, I can do research. I don't have to, because I'm not going to be a basic scientist. So I went to UCLA, and then because they had really good neuroimaging going on there. And during that time when I was there, I took a year off, and I went to NIH, and I did a clinical research training program fellowship, which is now the Med Scholars Research Program. And I was working with kids with emotional dysregulation and irritability. And there's this big clinical question, like how do you treat this in children? And is it bipolar disorder? Is it not? Is it? And this was the lab that developed SMD, which became DMDD. And so when I was working in that lab, I had the opportunity to first author a neuroimaging paper and then to be a co-author on 3 other papers because I did a bunch of analyses. And I think one of the most rewarding things for me is I just realized that I really like working with the kiddos who have emotional dysregulation, because I love trying to be part of a club that doesn't want me as a member, like Groucho Marx comment. And I like trying to establish a rapport with people. And I also think it's probably incredibly demoralizing to have dysregulated emotions, because it's just, and a lot of the kids, even though they show anger, they have depression underneath. So when I got back, I was pretty excited about research, and I wanted to do a research track. And so I started working with Nim Tottenham, and she did some work with kids who were previously institutionalized. So kiddos in facilities like this, where you have 50 kids, 1 caregiver cycling out at 8-hour intervals. So really suboptimal for attachment development. And I was reading a ton of Bowlby, and he's kind of a combination of Melanie Klein, right? So he's kind of an analyst, and he is very relationally oriented. But then also he has an ethology component to his work, because attachment is essentially proximity seeking towards a caregiver by a child when they're in distress, most of the time. So I actually, was doing a bunch of work with this, and I'm going to skip forward because we got started a little late and I want to make sure I get to everything. So one of the most important lessons I learned about this was, there's this working model, right? So it's a mental representation of the relationship with the primary caregiver, and then it kind of forms a template for future relationships, so we can kind of know what to expect. So before I tell you about the results, I'm going to just say something about the amygdala. And this may or may not be Steven Spielberg. No, it definitely is. Anyway, so the amygdala is something that people always associate with fear and anxiety. And often people don't think that the amygdala has about the fact that the amygdala has other functions. And it has a broader function of salience. So if I see a grizzly bear and they scare me or something, then it's relevant, it's salient, because I want to run or do whatever you're supposed to do when you see a grizzly bear. And if I see my parent, that's relevant to me. It's relevant for a different reason, right? So what we were looking at was a task where we showed mother and stranger stimuli to children. And initially, in a prior paper, my mentor, Nim, had published that, kids who were with their biological parents, who were typically developing healthy comparison children, they had higher amygdala reactivity to their parent versus a stranger, right? So it's that specific kind of, you're my person, right? And then I did some work with her to look at the previously institutionalized kiddos, and we found that, and we were studying indiscriminate friendliness behaviors outside the scanner in these kiddos. So what we found was that they had indiscriminate amygdala response to mother and stranger, and that further, the more indiscriminate friendliness they had outside the scanner, the more indiscriminate their amygdala reactivity is, and that the later they were adopted, the more accentuated this was. So that was really interesting. And when you think about how do you make a career in research, you're going to sometimes take a side step. So you're standing with your mentor in their research, and you learn the skills, and then you take a step just off to the side, just a little bit, so that you can be a different person than your mentor, a different investigator. So I was really interested in, what about the opposite? Not children looking at their mother, but about mothers looking at their children. So humorously enough, you sometimes meet people multiple places in research, and I'd worked for Ellen in her lab at NIMH, and she wrote this article before she actually became an investigator in irritability about moms and babies. So this is moms looking at their child versus an unfamiliar child. And what you can see here is that there's increased reactivity in the amygdala and the insula and the anterior cingulate, and then so the salience network, and then also the posterior temporal, superior temporal sulcus, which is also associated with parenting. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. And then I after my residency and fellowship, child fellowship, I started doing a postdoc. So I did a research postdoc. And I did that to obtain more skills and, to kind of broaden my research expertise so I could eventually write for grants on my own. So when you think about adversity, there's different ways to think about it. One way to think about it is kind of a categorical 1 or 0. So do you have any of these like any of these types of adversity? And then you add up a sum score of the 1 versus 0, and you have a cumulative risk. So that's kind of the number of types of events that you've had, which are these adversity events. The limitation of that is that you don't know what the severity is. You don't know, you also don't know developmental timing. You don't know also what type of events they were, because it's highly possible and actually true that based on the data, that institutionalization, that has different impacts than violence and other things. And we don't fully understand the differences, but, the idea was I went to a lab and worked with Young Kim, who studied poverty and stress and its impact on moms and babies, and they did home visits. And so what happened was I basically, she was studying the cumulative risk model. And so I pitched to study a little something different to focus on interpersonal violence in childhood. So that's what we started to look at. And we looked at mothers' responses to infant phases based on their childhood maltreatment experiences, exposure. And this is based on the risky families, which is kind of like a survey similar to the ACEs. And what we found was that, and these faces were not their infant. These faces were standardized infant stimuli. One limitation of this work is that the standardized infant stimuli were all white children. And this is a really significant limitation to think about, because we know there are differences in face processing based on race and ethnicity. And so some of the moms had inconcordance between like the white stimuli were not similar to their child. And so in my work now, I'm doing individualized stimuli for moms. But we found that they had moms who had childhood maltreatment exposure had lower amygdala reactivity to infant faces across valence, so regardless of emotion, compared to moms who didn't have exposure. And there was no difference in adult faces. I'm surprised about that. I thought there might be some difference. So, and then we looked at this maternal sensitivity measure, which is a macro coding measure of like kind of how do we evaluate the sensitivity of mothers over like a course of 10 minutes. And there's kind of one measure for that, right? It's a 1 to 7 scale. And we saw this interaction, but then really unpacking the interaction, they were kind of trend level. And it also made me think about like, is macro coding really the approach I want to use in my K? Because eventually you get to choose your own measures, which is super cool. And so I've actually switched to a microcoding approach, which is more analogous to the way animal behavior is studied. And I'm hoping that will be more objective too, and be less susceptible to bias. Because we do have bias based on our experiences of parenting, our experiences of being parented, our cultural backgrounds. And so we need to make sure that we study finite enough units of behavior so that we're actually able to be objective and to have concordance, like in terms of the way that people read things. So this was another paper on infant cries. And what we found here was that, and I'm gonna actually skip a little bit, let me actually skip forward. So, because I kind of want to get to this part, because this is, I think it's really important for researchers to share their successes as well as their non-successes. I actually think that's one of the most important things as a mentor. So I'm going to share with you some, roads that were a little rocky for me. So this is actually after postdoc. So I graduated from postdoc, and then I was like, I'm in Kansas anymore. So I started writing grants, and I put in my first K. I put a K into NIMH, and that was as I was graduating postdoc. And I was becoming faculty. So I knew there's kind of like a time limit, right? And so it came back as ND, and I didn't know what ND meant. So I called Office of Grants and Contracts and I said, like, what does indeed mean? And they said, it means not discussed. And I was like, what does that mean? And they said, it means that your grant was in the bottom 50% of grants and not going to get funded. And then they're just going to like not give you a score, but they'll give you feedback. And then I was like, really? That's awesome. And at that time, I was actually about to go to the ACAP research colloquium. So it was like very much on my mind. And I was ashamed that that happened because no one had ever told me that this happens all the time to people and to people who are really good and who have like multiple R1s now. So, but I think this is why I tell you, because I don't want you to feel this way that I did when I went home and binge watch Game of Thrones to make myself feel better. So I then put in a resubmission of that K, and then it came back as a 33. So that was not fundable. So I was like, okay, years passed, I'm faculty, I need to get a K. And so I talked to my mentor, one of my offsite mentors, Christina Manguri, and I said, do I have to write a second K? Like, what do you think? Do I have to diversify? What do I need to do here? I mean, I really want to study diversity. I'm running for NIMH. So at that time, that summer, I got an email from Sarah Helwig. And it was like, there's this K-12 program, NIDA. And I was like, well, I don't study substance use, but maybe I should, So then I read the literature and I was like, oh my goodness, there are such high rates of adversity in people who have substance use, and people are more likely to use substances early, often, and to have a use disorder. And I thought, why wasn't I studying this? So I actually met with Paula Riggs and she was all jazzed about it. So I came out and it was like, when you're in the boxing ring and like your trainer draws you off and then you're like ready to go into the next round. That's how I felt. And Neil Epperson, my chair, said to me, hey, I think you need to meet Kent Hutchison, who's a cannabis researcher and who's really good at writing grants. So Kent actually sat down with me. They did a mock review and they improved my NIMH grant, which he wasn't on, right? And so I was like, that's really cool that he did that. And I said to him, hey, do you want to be a mentor on a NIDA grant? Because I'm writing a second K. And he was like, okay. He's like, I also have a van. And we do actually research in the van. We actually have phlebotomy there. And I was like, this is so cool. I was like, yeah, I'm going to write a grant. So then reading the research, like so much overlap, right, between the areas involved, like in maternal behavior and the substance use and reward processing. So then I went in, I put in the NIMHK, that was a new submission. I put in the ACAP, K-12, and then I was like, so these are all the grants I wrote actually since 2015. And I want you to see this because I want you to see how many are not funded. I want you to know that that's normal and it doesn't mean you won't succeed. And so since so many were non-funded of these pilot awards and things like that, I was like, I'm going to actually submit a third K. It's going to go directly to NIDA because that's going to be a different review committee than the NIDA ACAP. I find out about NIDA ACAP in February and also about NIMH. And then I'll have this NIDA K23 in case the other one gets rejected. So then I got this letter and I was like, I was super happy because when I got this letter, the coolest thing about it, other than the fact that my grant was funded and my career was going to like hopefully go forward in research, was that I actually had taken a day off, except for this didactics I did in the morning, and I was skiing. I'm really bad skier. I learned once I was myelinated, so my brain was like, this is a bad idea with like all the slopes. But actually, I had also had an ankle injury and I was just coming back from that. So I was like pizzaing the heck out of the slope, like, putting my legs like this so I wouldn't fall. And I said to my husband that afternoon, as we were eating lunch, I said, this is the first time I didn't think about this grant for 4 hours when I'm awake today. I really turned off and it was awesome. And then I got this notification. So to me, like being able to turn off, being able to not think about it is really important, and I think, so I just have like, okay, so do I have 5 more minutes, do you think? Is that okay, you guys?
Yeah,
I
you have
think
fine.
Okay. So this is the K. And we're getting, we're basically doing a series of visits, and we're trying to, use imaging and also biological samples, because a lot of substance use research is not done with biological samples. It's done with self-report. The problem is when you do self-report with like you're talking about high potency cannabis, and it's taken in a variety of manners. So if you actually measure the endocannabinoids or the cannabinoids in the blood, it's actually accounting for the potency. It's accounting for the different delivery modes and things like that. So plus in perinatal populations, they are highly stigmatized when they're using substance use, especially, using substances especially. And so for that reason, people are often afraid to share, how much they are using. So I think it's important to kind of be able to validate these different measures. So I was initially recruiting, and I wanted to get to this part because I think this part is a huge part of my work, and I actually didn't predict that it would be. We're having such a hard time. We're having a really hard time recruiting people who are using cannabis. We were able to recruit people who were not using cannabis. And we were going through clinical channels, and I was like, why is it so difficult? And I knew that reporting was occurring in the background, even though I'm in Colorado where cannabis is legal. And that's changing now, thank goodness. But basically, I think what's happening is people getting reported for cord blood positive for THC to DHS. And so I wouldn't come back for my postpartum appointment either. And so I had decided to do this postpartum because I thought it would be more straightforward than pregnancy, but it turns out it was harder because harder to develop a rapport after someone has experienced this. So I just want to talk about this for a second, because I think it's a huge issue, and it's a huge issue for treatment. So basically, you have a pregnant person, prenatal exposure has occurred here, right? And then labor and delivery occurs here. Prenatal exposure has already happened, right? And it's not that it's not a big deal that there's prenatal exposure. However, when you think about what's going to be helpful for a family, being reported after you were in labor for 18 hours with your first child is probably not helpful, right? It makes people feel like it's punitive and criminalized and things like that. And I think I know it lessens the chances that people will get care. I know this partially because we're doing a systematic review on this. Also, this person's life did not start when they were pregnant. They had other things happen to them before. So we need to have a trauma-informed approach. Additionally, when you think about the interactions with the medical system, when someone tells their provider they're using cannabis, sometimes they experience judgment. Sometimes they experience like not wanting to go to the provider because they're concerned they'll be asked or tested. So they're not getting the same care. And then we think about Maslow, hierarchy of needs. I think a bunch of us probably here at least are probably blessed to live in this part of the pyramid most of the time. And when there's somebody who is using substances and they're having problems with it, a lot of times they're in this part of the pyramid. So the social determinants of health are real, and we need to pay attention. So of course we want to prevent child abuse and neglect, right? This is ACAP, right? We want to do that. And a lack of transparency around like the testing. So what are the benefits of being tested, like the cord blood? Do they tell you they're going to test you before? This sort of thing. And like people's understanding of consent is variable, right? And also reporting doesn't equal care. So we got to think about like, what are the chances they're going to get care? Like, what can we do to maximize the chances that they get care? And then of course there are horrible inequities in reports. And there's actually a terrible history of, in communities of color, in American communities, of children being removed. So this is the team, and actually Leah, shout out to you, you're on the call, so thank you for that. And I just want to show you this review that we did. So we did a review of the policies. with none of us are lawyers, nor do we play one on TV, but actually Amir is, and he's at CU Boulder, so he collaborated with us, and we looked at the state laws around mandated reporting, and we actually classified them as more or less punitive. The last thing I want to leave you with is that, like, you may think it's random to bring up a MRI article at this point, but it actually isn't, because right now there are, there's more evidence that MRIs is not as like that it's relatively safe in pregnancy. There's fetal MRI research, and there was a great systematic review recently on which this commentary is based. And in post-op speed Jackson world, when we measure when we test whether someone's pregnant or not, and then we record it in our study, if abortion is criminalized in that place, they might be at more risk. So we've got to think about other options. We suggest self-testing in this article. And it's a long road to convince IRBs, but these maps overlap. And there's more unintended pregnancy and lack of access to contraception when people are using substances. And there's been a horrible history also with forced sterilization, which has affected both populations using substances and populations of color. So it's not always straightforward thinking about contraception and how to, what's the optimal way to do this. So I'm going to close with this, and I am going to just give you my rules. Apparently, there are too many slides. So you're going to channel whack-a-mole. If you don't know what whack-a-mole is, it's a game where you hit the moles with a mallet, right? It's very cathartic. I highly recommend. But this time, when you're in research, you're going to be the mole. You're going to keep popping up, and I'm just going to hit you with the mallet, and you're going to keep popping up, and you're not going to go away until you get funded. Because that's what you got to do if you want to do this, right? Second thing is, if the research process seems like the Morris water maze to you, it's because it is, right? Often I wonder, where does the platform go, right? It's hard, and the reviewers change in the study section, and then reviewer 2 is not reviewer 2 later. I mean, it's a whole thing, right? But it's really part of it, and you got to keep swimming. It's really important. So listening to Dory, if you decide not to do research, that's okay too. And people are terrified to have this conversation with their mentor, and most mentors react quite well. And if they don't, they're not such a good mentor, right? And then here, if you have a good partner, be a good partner. And my husband is so understanding about my career and my partner in adventure, and I would love to answer questions.
Thank you. I really appreciated your talk, and I will go ahead and read the questions and comments now. And go ahead and feel free to direct message or post into chat. To get us started, how would you recommend that trainees advocate for trauma-informed care in our healthcare systems? Oh, you're on mute, maybe.
Sorry, there was a Gen X moment. I would recommend that if you see something, say something, right? If you and find the people in your system of care who are open to change, right? So find those people, and actually find people that you see as who could be mentors to you. I have mentors who they're amazing in terms of their advocacy for patients, and then they pull me into things, and then I start to get involved, and then I do a presentation with them, and then I'm doing a presentation without them. And so I think you've got to find the people to support you in advocating, and at the same time, if you see something that you feel like is inappropriate or not trauma informed, figuring out a way to speak up about it in a way that is not in the heat of the moment, but really thinking, how am I gonna work with people on this? How am I gonna have a relationship, building a conversation when I really totally disagree with what this person is doing?
Sure. I like that, a relationship building conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, the words help me understand are very helpful. Like when you say, help me understand why this seems like the right option. What do you think about that? Kind of eliciting what the person is thinking.
Sure. And then how would you recommend that a trainee in residency manage finding research mentors and actively doing research on top of the demands of residency?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I think, well, first of all, the research mentors one is a little bit of an easier one. When you meet with someone, think about how they make you feel. Like whether there's someone that you feel like you could work with, whether there's someone you feel like would support you. And I think that's even more important than the content of what you're learning, right? Because if you don't have a good relationship with them, it's not going to be a positive experience. And you only have so much time, right? So you don't want to waste your time working with somebody who you feel like doesn't support you, right? In terms of balancing the demands, I would say I am such a fan of having my laptop with me pretty much everywhere I go. And if I have like a no-show in clinic, I'm on. I mean, I use my laptop for clinic too, but like, but you know, I just switched to the research mode. You know, if I follow up with the no-show, like, I reschedule and then I am like hitting the books in terms of the research. So I can like pull up the MRI analysis program and just start doing it. So get good at set shifting. I think that's the most important thing. And also having too many goals actually will leave you kind of feeling depleted, diffuse, and unable to complete things. So you need to have a balance between having enough things that you have more eggs in the nest, depending like if this one doesn't get accepted or if this one takes like a 35-page response to reviewers to get accepted, true story, then so that way you've got it. So you got to have a couple projects, but you've got to have not too many because it's otherwise. And I think talking to your mentor about this, and if your mentor isn't the person to organize you, finding someone else who you can ask about these things is helpful.
Thank
Great
you.
questions.
And then could you tell us a little bit more about how you are incorporating DEI principles into your current work? And also, like, kind of striking that balance between trying to serve but not being overly intrusive.
100%. I think, well, there's actually, there's another kind of arm of my research, which I've been working with the American Heart Association and in the Empowered to Serve program. The Empowered to Serve program has a long a long history of creating health lesson content in collaboration with faith-based organizations serving Black and Hispanic communities. And so we've been creating a lot of content along with the leaders, and then they disseminate that content, free of charge to their congregations. So that's one aspect in which I've been, and that is not actually, I don't originally have training in health services, but there was an opportunity with a mentor, and the mentor agreed to was looking for someone who had substance use expertise. And mentors said to me, hey, you should go work with this person. And so, that's part of it. So some of the content is DEI based content in terms of being inclusive, but really, I think one of the most important things in the study has been, I just tried to listen to the participants. I asked them, like at the end of the study, I asked, hey, how was this for you? What do you think about this? Like, are there ways we can improve it? What do you think we need to study? What I'd like to do eventually is to set up a community advisory board of like a mom's council where they can kind of help me to figure out the correct study questions, which are actually going to serve them best. But I think it is really, yeah, I mean, it's like, and if people ask me for advice, I can provide it, but I don't offer advice without being asked, if that makes sense, except for referrals, or if somebody has a safety concern. I talked about that.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then we have a question. Please go ahead. You can unmute. Oh, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to thank you so much, Dr. Olsavsky, for like sharing your trajectory with us in addition to sharing your research and trying to foster resilience among us. I'm a PGY2 at a kind of a quasi-academic hospital system in New Jersey. And I have been, I felt like doing research has been a bit of an uphill battle during residency. And in getting ready to apply to CAP fellowships, I'm kind of looking for a home where I feel like there would be more research mentorship. I've had some great mentors, but it's nobody is devoting a lot of their time to research where I'm at.
Right.
Do you have any tips for how to kind of navigate the process of trying to make fellowship you know, so it has been productive. I'm not saying it hasn't been productive in residency, but you know, a more resourced experience research wise.
Yeah. I mean, so one thing I'll say, first of all, is I was even in a research track in residency and a research track in fellowship. And there's a reason why, like, you know, kind of the last big paper is like 2013 and then it's like 2019. And I'm like, there's a reason, right, why you have a gap. And that it is really hard to balance, right? And you know, you can only do so much at once, right? And so I think ACAP is a really good place to connect with people. And so I think what I would do, I guess what I would recommend is finding, so when I was looking at fellowships, I also had a two-body concern in terms of my husband was not like yet promoted to husband, but he was boyfriend and I wanted him to come. And so I needed to think about like him. I needed to think about research mentor. I needed to think about adequate therapy training because that was really important to me too. And so figure out what your priorities are. And then, I mean, I think it helps to make a spreadsheet, honestly. I know it's kind of a nerdy answer, but make a spreadsheet and actually then actively asking on the interview trail about like research in the programs. You can kind of tell which are the bigger research universities in terms of like, if you look at the faculty and then you look at PubMed, you can kind of cross-reference. I think it also helps to figure out where you want to go next, right? Like, so if you, like, if I was moving and I wanted to be like, I want to be in a place where there's an infant mental health fellowship, well, that's like certain places. So figure out what your interest is and then see what are the places where you can go, where you also would like to live, because that's also important. And yeah, and if you have questions, you can ping me for sure. No problem.
I would gratefully take you up on that.
You did good. Do it. It's good. All good.
Thank you so much. Did you share your contact in the beginning?
I will. So if you don't get a response, definitely ping me again in a week. But yeah, like definitely email me, let me know. We can, I mean, if you're at ACAP, we can meet at ACAP also.
I will be there.
But I think ACAP, actually, I think probably you should think about it before ACAP, because it's good to, if you're interested in certain programs, it's good to figure out like, are there people who are speaking from that program? Are there potential research mentors? Go to their talk and then go up and schmooze, you know? I mean, so.
Plan it out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Plan it out in advance and say, hey, I'm interested. I've had people contact me and say, hey, I'm interested in hearing about your work. I'm applying a CAP fellowship. Like, could we meet? And I definitely, you know, I'm open to that. So
100%. Thank you so much again.
Such a pleasure to be with you guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it looks like Annika is sharing ways to search for ACAP mentors in the chat if anyone's looking for resources.
Exactly.
Oh,
We are working on a mentor match portal, but until that debuts, keep in mind, like Dr. Olsavsky said, any of the spaces you go to, and especially the ACAP spaces, note people that you want to connect with for mentorship. We have over 60 committees. There are committee meetings throughout the year. Mind you, there are limits in terms of who can be appointed on a committee, but there are many committees that are open and have meetings. For instance, the psychotherapy committee, the substance use committee has journal sessions quarterly. You have the ECP committee, you have the global health and environment committee. And if you've noticed in ACAP News, we started posting all of the events there, but also what I'm going to put in the chat is the calendar for the medical student and resident Google calendar, because we post all of those events that are offered through ACAP, at least virtual learning and mentorship events in that calendar. And as I get any events by partner organizations like APA or any of the federal programs or anything that's related to child mental health, we add them to the calendar. So keep an eye out, keep this calendar marked, and I'm going to put it in the chat shortly.
This
And
reminds
thank
me
you,
of,
Aviva.
oh, this reminds me of two things. Definitely attend the mentorship program. I was like attending it all the way up until then they asked me to be a mentor. I mean, I really like from med student onward. And I just love it. I met so many people. I feel like ACAP's my home. And also when you meet me, because you call me Dr. Olsavsky, I want to remind everyone, you guys can always just call me Aviva. So it's so nice to meet you, and such a pleasure to be able to speak with you.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It was very enlightening and very inspiring. And I'm sure that there are going to be many mentees reaching out to learn more from you. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Give me a moment. I just sent in a feedback form. So if you could take a moment to complete that feedback form, the one entered into chat, and that will help us improve our future sessions. And please mark your calendar for our upcoming session on Thursday, June 20th, featuring Dr. Dolores Bigfoot from the University of Oklahoma and Indian Country Child Trauma Center. So thank you all and have a lovely evening.